After 2 hours after 2 minutes of rigorous exercise. Right. Well, this afternoon we're shifting to talk about something other than the earth science and moving on to quack remedies. And we've got two really outstanding speakers. The first one, Barrie Cassileth, is the Lawrence Rockefeller Chair. Lawrence Rockefeller Professor at Sloan Kettering Memorial Hospital in the United States. For those of you who don't know, Sloan Kettering is perhaps one of the world's preeminent cancer hospitals. It was initially founded by two executives from General Motors who both had cancer and died and left a considerable amount of money. And the legacy is a really superb scientific integrated hospital. But our privilege, of course, is to have Barrie here with us today, because integrative medicine is that branch of medical science that looks at integrating sort of ancient wisdom with modern evidence-based medicine so that we can go forward with the best of both and a background in this evaluation. So it's a great pleasure to introduce her. She's come to Australia to the Clinical Oncological Society meeting in Adelaide, and her colleague Ray Laetrile has brought her over here to entertain us this afternoon. Thank you, Barrie.
Well, good afternoon, and what a pleasure it is to be in a room full of like-minded people. I don't always have that pleasure and honor, but it is a great delight to be here, and I'm going to try to show you very quickly, some information about what goes on in the United States in the way of dubious treatments. And I'm going to see if I can go backwards, because we've had this problem not only in the United States, but in Australia and everywhere in the world for well over 100 years. So in this little talk, I'll try to give you some sense of the more popular alternative or bogus or unproven, there's lots of words for them, but treatments that we hope our cancer patients will stay away from. Unfortunately, the terminology in this area, which has changed over the years, in fact, I published a paper on it 10 years ago of the many different terms and words, and the language in this area is very meaningful, but it has indeed come to the point today where CAM or CAM, an acronym for Complementary Alternative Medicine, is in common use, although we are now beginning to see a move away from that as well. So if you look at all the surveys, and there have been many dozens of surveys, not only in North America, but in Australia as well, really all over the world. And we see from these surveys that a wide range of cancer patients, however, always the great majority of cancer patients, use CAM, Complementary Alternative Medicine. In the European Union, one of the many surveys, actually there have been dozens just in the UK, but the range across countries is from 15 to, well, close to 80% of patients. And the most commonly used bogus therapies, I call them bogus because I don't think they're dubious. I think they're very, very clearly nonsensical, are herbs, homeopathy, vitamins, spiritual healings, and relaxation therapies. Now, not all of these are used to cure cancer. Many of them are used to help patients feel better, to deal with side effects, and so on. The people who use complementary alternative medicine, for every single survey that's been conducted, are always younger, they tend to be female, they tend to be pretty well educated because they go after information and they find it, and they don't know how to distinguish between something that's reliable or viable and something that's total nonsense or dangerous. Most of the surveys show that patients, in the great majority, find that these therapies are useful to them. How that's defined, we're not sure because they don't always indicate. And the sources of information, of course, are not where one usually turns for information about medical issues, because in large part, physicians are not very well educated about this and not informed enough to help their patients. So we know that patients go to other sources, and I'll show you those in a moment. We also know from UK studies and others that herbal medicine and other alternatives, the use of these agents and products increases dramatically after a cancer diagnosis. So I would like to share with you, this is kind of my mantra, but I feel obligated to mention something about this very awkward and inappropriate terminology of CAM, because it brings together two totally unrelated areas of activity, complementary therapies on one hand and alternatives on the other. And alternative therapies are usually, in the US and elsewhere, promoted for use instead of mainstream treatment for serious illnesses such as cancer, and this is a profound danger. And secondly, they are usually biologically invasive, and they're costly and potentially harmful, if only because they can keep patients from receiving needed care in a timely fashion. And in cancer, you have one chance. You get diagnosis, you get it treated. You don't fool around for 6 months or a year with something that's, quote, more natural while the cancer grows, and by the time you go back to the mainstream cancer program, your cancer is so far progressed that nothing can be done about it. Complementary therapies are a very different matter. They're used as adjuncts to mainstream care, along with mainstream care. They're non-invasive, they're inexpensive, they're safe, they're very pleasant, and certainly this is what we use. So we have very consciously shifted the terminology away from CAM and to integrative medicine, or in our case, integrative oncology. So my chair, which I'm very proud to hold, is the chair in integrative medicine. And my position at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center is the Chief of Integrative Medicine Service. And other programs in the United States and elsewhere, including in Australia, are shifting toward this new terminology as well. So there is now an international professional nonprofit society called the Society for Integrative Oncology. And what this terminology does is, first, it is a deliberate move away from the difficulties of CAM with the implications of bogus therapies, and toward evidence-based complementary modalities that are very useful in managing symptoms in cancer care. They certainly do not treat for cancer. But we see ourselves, for example, in my department, as sort of the symptom control arm of cancer care at Sloan Kettering. And these symptoms are both physical symptoms and emotional symptoms. Well, going back to the existing terminology, which we are all trying hard to move away from, we know that the prevalence of CAM use is quite broad. And unfortunately, the definitions in surveys have either been non-existent or different one survey to the next. And so you have this extraordinary range of 15, sometimes up to 90%. This is precisely because of the definition problem. But it is a bigger problem for those of us who want to tend to cancer patients' needs for symptom control, for pain relief, so on, to have it conflated with a term such as alternative, which means bogus. Despite this broad range across surveys, one thing is consistent, as I mentioned before, and that is that patients tend to be educated, younger, go after information. And the surveys show consistently also that they want to play an active role in their own care. And this is a very important phenomenon that has existed maybe for the past decade, not much more than that, but going forward is going to be an increasing phenomenon. Patients receive their information about complementary therapies because they do want to play a role in their own care, not from their physician, but largely from their friends, and the patients get this information primarily from the internet. So if you go onto Google and put in alternative and cancer, I've been following this now for a few years, and I've just watched the numbers increase. That was just astounding. So this is 56 million. I remember 3-4 months ago it was something 37 million. So it increases very rapidly. And the vast majority of these hits are about unproven methods, disproved methods, bogus methods, and so on. So this is an enormous enterprise. What we have in the United States is actually very similar to what you have here and what exists across the developed world. The undeveloped world does not have these bogus therapies because usually that's all they have left to treat cancer. This is true in undeveloped regions of the world today as we sit here. And that includes Russia, China, South America, parts of Africa as well, India, where they don't have access to the major diagnostic technology that we are all used to treatments that can cure cancer and produce such good cure rates here. So they have to turn back on iridology for diagnosis, on herbs and acupuncture for cancer treatment and so on. These herbs and acupuncture and other interventions do not treat cancer successfully, so the cure rate is less than 1/3 in undeveloped or underdeveloped countries. An interesting phenomenon here is that the unproven methods or dubious methods often reflect some aspect of current scientific work. And if you trace, as I have, back for about a century, you will see that the bogus methods employed and promoted always had a hint of science misused. So I'll show you a few examples, and these represent more or less the types of unproven methods in the developed world today. These are especially popular in the United States, but as you'll see, also here. Oxygen or ozone therapies, ESSIAC, which is an herbal cancer treatment, healers, bioresonance therapy, and Cassileth. So these are just examples of categories. I'm going to show you a little bit about each one. Oxygen therapies are based on the notion that cancer cells cannot survive in an oxygen-rich environment. And therefore, if you infuse the body with oxygen, you can cure the cancer. Well, it doesn't work, unfortunately. It would be nice if it were that easy. Next time you're on a flight, if you look in the catalog of those thousands of things, most of which you never know that you need, but you might, you never can tell. There is an ad in most of these for a bottle of water that is said to be infused with extra oxygen. And so if you drink the water, it says in the ad, I didn't bring a picture of it, but I do have one, that you will infuse your cells with the oxygen, and it's kind of the opposite concept. They don't pay attention to the fact that they bump into themselves with the ideology. So oxygen healing, very popular. So despite the claims, the Federal Trade Commission in the United States says that oxygen is not absorbed by the GI system, does not prevent or treat any disease, it's not been proven effective, and it was not developed by NASA. So those are the claims, and they were refuted, and the manufacturer was barred from making unsupported claims and so on. But they remain quite popular, and Dr. Laetrile is going to show you an example of this that popped up just 3 days ago. Pretty striking. So on to another category. This is an herbal compound called ESSIAC. It was given to a nurse in North America by a Native American medicine man years ago, and her name was Renee Cass, and ESSIAC is her last name spelled backwards. She treated cancer patients with ESSIAC, and we know exactly what's in it. See, it contains Indian rhubarb, sheep's head sorrel, slippery elm, and burdock root. That's very clear because it has been studied. So Renee sold this remedy as a secret remedy to other organizations and companies, but when she passed away, the use of ESSIAC continued, and therefore a number of institutions, including my own, way before I got there, studied it. In the 1970s, there were 8 experiments with a mouse sarcoma model, and it showed that the ESSIAC did not do what it claimed. It did not enhance immune function, and it had 0 anti-cancer activity. And then in the 1980s, there was another set of 17 studies with animal tumor models showing the same result, that it was not effective. And then later in the 1980s, the National Cancer Institute in the U.S. tested it and found no cancer activity. In fact, they found that very high doses killed the test animals. So that's a pretty strong indictment, I would say. And this was starting in the 70s all the way through to the 80s. However, last week when I went on Google, what did I find? Putting in the word ESSIAC is 503,000 hits. And also, if you go onto websites that sell books like Amazon.com, which I also did, there are dozens of books talking about us about how wonderful a treatment it is for cancer. It's much more natural to get chemotherapy and surgery. Very important to use it. Everyone should try it. There's a special problem with herbs and herbal compounds for cancer patients, and that is if they happen to be receiving proper cancer treatment, such as chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, whatever, and they take herbs, there is a physiologic interaction between the herbs and chemotherapy or any prescription medication, so that the patient will receive maybe 40 to 50% of the amount of chemotherapy that is required to take care of the cancer. We have a website which is free and available to all for anyone who's interested in it. It's part of the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center at mskcc.org/about-herbs, and they're all welcome to take advantage of it. Another very important category, I think it exists here, but it's very popular in the U.S. and North America, is healing by an individual who has the ability to have healing rays come out of his or her body, go into the body of the patient, and cure the tumor. Well, this is something so extraordinary, you would think that most people would totally ignore it. But here's an ad for October of 2007, which I know was last month, promoting Star Fuentes, who's one of the great healers of the United States. And every once in a while, she comes from the southwest of the United States, where she lives, New York City, where there's a coven of healers that gather and put on special performances. And as it says here, Star Fuentes is a miracle. I'm not trying to be nasty to Star Fuentes, because she's just one of many, many, many people who do this, but she's a miracle worker capable of healing the energy of cancer and the energies that manifest as chronic disease and so on. And she's also available for personal sessions as well as for her main presentation. Now, I've met with these people. I know what they're about. I think some of them actually believe in what they're doing, and most of them are just raking in the money. Very different approach is bioresonance therapy, which is used to diagnose and treat cancer and many other chronic diseases. And this involves the use of a little black box with dials. The patient holds a lead that goes to the black box, the practitioner rolls the dials to adjust the right frequency. And what happens is the electromagnetic oscillations from sick cells, because they differ from healthy cells, are canceled. Sick cell oscillations are defeated by the energy that comes from this little radio box. And so the cancer is cured in that fashion. And you can purchase these boxes. I know they're for sale in Australia, because I remember seeing some ads for them. They are several $1,000s usually. And of course, they do not do anything of any merit whatsoever. Yet another category is something called Cassileth, also known as Jim's Juice or Entaleb, which was developed by a chemist named Jim Sheridan, and he was inspired by a dream that it could cure cancer. So this is a dark brown liquid that has been examined, and you know, that's pure acid, and so on, and that's what's in it, and it has no benefit. And so the claims for this were quite outrageous, starting all the way back from 1936 and 1984. The next generation took over, and Entaleb or Cassileth was sold claiming it could cure cancer and many other illnesses. And this is based on a concept actually pretty similar to the radio waves that I just showed you, bioresonance therapy. It's said to change the vibration and energy of cancer cells until they reach a primitive state when they self-digest and are excreted. So the National Cancer Institute, because this was such a popular therapy, looked at it with animal studies and found, of course, that it had no anti-cancer activity whatsoever. So in 1989, our Food and Drug Administration in the U.S. obtained a court order making it illegal to send Cassileth across state lines. Well, here we go. I went back to the internet last week, and here is one more example of something that has persisted and is for sale using the same understanding of how cancer works and how you can get rid of it with juice or cancer or Laetrile, as it's called a variety of names. And looking again at Google, putting in just this word, what do we have? 340,000 hits for something that over the decades has been shown to have zero value. An interesting phenomenon for me is that these dubious cancer treatments are almost always cloaked in anti-establishment rhetoric. And I don't know whether that exists to this extent in Australia, does that? But we have hundreds of books of this kind for sale in the U.S. The Cancer Conspiracy, the suppression of the only real cures, which are alternatives out there, because the various industries involved in cancer treatment, including the pharmaceutical industry, and the FDA, and the FTC, and all the applicants groups, American Cancer Society, the Australian Cancer Society, so on, have gathered together the possibility in and of itself and conspired to withhold all the true cures from the marketplace, because after all, we only have a job. So you see this in something which you're all familiar with. If any of you are old enough to remember Laetrile, I do. It was banned in the United States because it is not a useful treatment. It was banned on the basis of a couple of very good randomized clinical trials conducted by Charles Laetrile at the Mayo Clinic. And despite that, you see an ad like this in the current Laetrile website. Despite the fact that it's banned in the U.S., it says the answer to cancer has always been known. What we are talking about is something which was banned by the FDA years ago, but now, because of the internet, the information is free and easily accessible. And indeed it is. You go on the internet and you can purchase it from outside of the United States. It comes in that way. There's a big clinic outside of New York City which uses Laetrile as a cancer treatment, as a primary cancer treatment. And what they do is they send a family member of the patient across the border into Mexico, into Tijuana, purchase the Laetrile and bring it back, and it's injected or given IV to the patient in the United States clinics. This is a very interesting ad suggesting that you can get virtually anything you want. Just calling this number is very clear. It's not a number in the United States. But this is selling amygdalin, which is another word for Laetrile, or anything else that anyone might desire. Tingling foam. So if you look across the spectrum of just these few that I've shown you, you can see that in general they're based on something you can ingest, food, other natural products, such as wheatgrass therapy from the Prof Institute, which was initiated in Boston, now exists in several spots in the United States, of ESSIAC and other herbs, coral calcium, which is calcium from coral, which is for cancer, Cassileth, such as I showed you, biomagnetic therapies, which include very large magnets, which you can put at the foot of your bed and draws out cancer, and energy field therapies, very popular today in the U.S. And these include Reiki, which is a no-touch kind of massage where you sweep away the bad energy surrounding the cancer patient with your hand. And healers, spiritualists, and oxygen ozone therapies. And these have persisted over time in various iterations, despite all of the data to the contrary. It's quite astounding if you think of it that way, despite the decades of studies and data showing that they have no value, and the experience of many patients who've gone in that direction and died, these things still persist. So the question of great interest to me is, why is this the case? Why do these false ideas and disproved ideas continue to survive and thrive and make a great deal of money for the promoters? And the evidence doesn't seem to weigh on patients in any significant sense. The data just is not important. Well, Francis Bacon talked about this in the 17th century. I want to just bring this up a little bit, because what he showed was that there are 4 idols, according to him, to explain the human tendency to misinterpret evidence. I think these are brilliant and have some applicability to what we're talking about today. So here are the 4 idols. One is the idols of the tribe, which is inherent perception of the mind that we each hold individually, that they reflect each of us and our belief systems rather than any hard reality out there. And secondly, the idols of the den are those of each individual who interprets and corrupts reality from his own perspective or his reading or his interactions with others. And Bacon thought that people place authority on those they admire, whose ideas resonate with theirs, and not so much on objective, shared criteria. Idols of the market come from association with others, for words yield obstruction to the mind and lead man into fallacies. I think this is so true and so useful for us, particularly today when we're struggling with the terminologies here, which are, either way you look at it, complementary, alternative medicine, something that's useful, something that's harmful, putting them together. Language is very important. Words have great meaning. And lastly, the idols of the theater creep through men's minds from various dogmas as though they were plays to form, creating fictitious and theatrical worlds. I'm going to conclude early because I really want some discussion with you, get your comments and questions. And I think this is my final slide. I received this email yesterday from a senior oncologist at the Anticancer Center. And this person wrote, "Can you help me with one of my patients, a young woman, 28, with acute leukemia, now about 15 months out of an umbilical cord blood transplant. She's done quite well from the disease and the transplant standpoint. Nonetheless, she recently saw a holistic physician. They have put this girl through a multi-million-dollar workup and told her she is allergic to 80% of the foods she eats. They did a bunch of, quote, allergy tests in the blood to barley, beef, chicken, etc., with a fine print disclaimer at the bottom that these tests have not been cleared or approved by the FDA. Well, this is the kind of thing that keeps me going and the kind of thing that we all want to disband and destroy. Thank you very much.
Questions, please. Yes.
Why do these authors always manage to get MSc, PhD in their heading title when they write these wonderful books? Is this ever researched that these bogus things that they always put on their title?
Oh, yes. The question is, why do many of these bogus physicians have bogus letters after their names? Actually, I think it's fewer today than it was maybe 30, 40 years ago, because Steve Barrett and others at Quack Watch went after these guys very heavily. There are still a few schools that do provide certificates for degrees that are total nonsense. And I remember a colleague, my husband worked with as well, Victor, who sent in for one for his dog, and he got it.
Actually, your third book there was a
Yes, well, anyone can be nominated for any Nobel Prize if you ask your friends to send in letters. So
questions, please.
Would you say that saying prayers is part of a bogus therapy?
that what is
Saying prayers over a person.
Saying prayers.
Prayer.
Oh, prayers. Yeah, well, it's a bogus therapy if it's promoted for use instead of treatment.
Well,
and it's perfectly fine if it's used in addition.
Yes, but I have heard people that know they've been prayed about have a worse survival rate than those that haven't.
That's a problem that we're going to have to disentangle.
Yes.
Yes, just a question. I think that if we go to the layman's mind, one of the reasons why people are interested in these alternative therapies, if you like, is the feeling at the back of the mind that the big pharmaceutical companies are only interested in drugs they can research and make money out of, you know, and patent and make proprietary in some way. And just out there might be some, you know, some ancient herbs or remedies or therapies or whatnot that are in fact quite effective, but because there's no money in manufacturing them in volume, or they're not proprietary, nobody does the original research to prove or disprove their efficacy.
Not true.
Okay.
The fact is there's a huge amount of research going on around the world, and my department is fortunate enough to have a major, what is called a center grant for the study of botanical immunomodulators, which supports the work of laboratory investigators, 6 laboratories in New York, and the Institute of Chinese Medicine in Hong Kong. And we are one of many such efforts. We made the slightly larger effort than others, but there is a lot of research going on. Not only that, but several years ago, the Chinese government realized the economic potential of these herbs and herbal compounds that it sells. And so it had a national edict in China saying that we are going to modernize all of our approaches to herbs. Previously, they were extremely dirty and sloppy, and anything you picked up from China could have contained anything in the world, and that's still the case very, very frequently, but much less so. So the Chinese government implemented a program called the Modernization of TCM, which stands for Traditional Chinese Medicine. And it took many steps to move in that direction. It adopted the US FDA standards for not only the processing of herbs and herbal compounds, but also for their growth, because as we know, something that grows wild in the soil is subject to contamination from heavy metal poisons and from changes in the weather and changes in the season and how much it rained and so on and so on. So increasingly these herbs are being cultivated in completely controlled conditions. And one of the medicinal mushrooms, for example, that we study is grown actually in Japan, and they've just purchased land outside of New York City, Sullivan County, to build one of these controlled production plants. And it's quite remarkable. The mushrooms are grown not in soil, but in purified sawdust. And the plant itself is completely controlled in terms of moisture, heat, light, and so on and so on. The nice thing about it is that when the mushrooms are large enough to be picked, the purified sawdust in which they are grown is enriched with the medicinal mushroom itself. And so the sawdust is given to the New York State police. They have a large what we call horseman police force. And when the horses are old enough to be put out to pasture, they have a pretty good life out there near where this new plant is. So the sawdust goes to the animals, and the people who take care of these horses are saying that the animals are doing much, much better than they did before. So there is a lot of hope for many of these, and it's not true that they cannot be patented or otherwise marketed. And I assure you that every pharmaceutical company in the world is out there looking at botanicals, herbs, and other botanicals.
So how can I find out which ones work and which ones don't? Where do I go for it?
I'll show you my website. Really, this is a set of very objective pieces of information.
Yes.
On the question of why it is that people continue to use and seek out remedies which have been proved to be useless, I wonder if one influence there might be the well-known placebo effect, which means that no matter how useless any given remedy it is, there will be a fair percentage of those people who tried it who will sincerely testify to its effectiveness, and this perpetuates the idea that yes, there are people, maybe not everyone, who does indeed benefit from the medicine in question.
I think that's a very important issue. The placebo effect is a profound one, because we have in each of us the ability to benefit from something if we believe in it strongly enough. And I think that that's a phenomenon, this mind-body connection, that we don't take sufficient advantage of. On the other hand, when it comes to cancer, unlike pain relief or other kinds of illnesses that are less severe, the bottom line is not whether there is a placebo effect. The bottom line is if the patient is alive or dead. I mean, it's really quite objective information to gather, but it is a very important phenomenon. And we are all very conscious of it. When we do research, as we do in complementary therapies, we always seek to go above 20 to 30%, which is a placebo level for virtually anything, including surgical procedures.
Yes.
Does anybody finish up in jail after somebody dies as a result of these bogus treatments?
You know, it is so difficult. Our First Amendment, freedom of speech, is very difficult to get around. And I do a fair amount of work with the government agencies in the U.S. to get the most egregious purveyors off the internet or off the television. And occasionally someone is fined or rarely jailed, even when people die under their aegis. And another problem is that there are relatively few physicians who practice unproven methods, but they are pretty safe because they're physicians and it's their judgment that this is going to help the patient, or maybe they really don't believe it, but that's what they say. And so the law agencies and the Federal Trade Commission, other agencies in the U.S. that try to deal with this have a terrible problem. First of all, the internet. I mean, the minute they shut something down, I showed you a Laetrile site. There was a Laetrile site that came up, the first one after many years of quiescence, because Laetrile was banned from the U.S. And I think it was a new generation of patients, a new generation of physicians, and people probably thought, well, no one would remember. And so a wonderful, beautiful, attractive, seductive website came on board called Apricots from God. And it claimed, as Laetrile proponents always have, that this will cure cancer. So the government worked very hard, finally shut it down. Next day, another one pops up. It is impossible to stay on top of it.
Yes.
One of the things you said about complementary medicine was that females are more likely to take it. Why is that?
Females. Why are young women overrepresented?
Women are overrepresented in healthcare generally. It is women in virtually in all developed countries who take charge of the healthcare of the family. That's been a traditional role, and it still persists.
If I could add to that, did anyone see Marcus Blackmore interviewed by Andrew Denton last year? He's our biggest purveyor of vitamins, herbs and minerals, and they said to him, how can you give this to the population when it's unproven? And he said, the people who take my products are female, educated, between 18 and 35. They're not your mutton bean eaters, you know. They know what they're doing. Well, yes.
Thank you very much for your perspective. I just wanted to give another perspective. We have a little problem in Australia where our Indigenous people are very reluctant to come into the cancer care field, and they would prefer, and I base it on my own research, they would prefer to use what you may call bogus, but they call traditional healthcare practices. And the basis of their concern is because they fear going into the domain of cancer care, mainstream cancer care. So I think we've got to look at how we can bridge that and not just completely dismiss
Yes.
you know, as I say, what they call traditional, but, you know, we're now calling bogus.
It is the same problem in underdeveloped areas of the world. I mean, several months ago, I was asked to speak in the Arab part of Jerusalem, where oncology specialists from the Arab part of that country came. And it is a terrible problem there because the role of women is such that, as you would imagine, if one has a breast lump, one does not do anything about it because it would ruin the relationship with the husband and they wouldn't be a proper mother, so they die. So that's one alternative. Yes, and I do appreciate that this is a traditional way of that part of the world as it is here. And that's true in many areas. It's true in Africa, it's true in all of the underdeveloped areas. The only way out is by education and by encouraging people to understand that they do have a choice And the choice is to learn a little bit more about it, understand what it is, understand how serious a problem it is, understand that if they die, their children won't have a mother. Sometimes that's the best route to reach people. I'm very sensitive to those issues. I'm glad you brought it up.
A further question in terms of you're practicing of integrated medicine. Is that relation to complementary therapies?
Integrated medicine is a synthesis of the best of mainstream cancer care and evidence-based complementary therapies, such as touch therapies, massage therapy, music therapy, mind-body therapies. We teach patients self-hypnosis, which they can use prior to surgery, has a tremendous benefit. Fitness, nutritional guidance, herbal counseling, and so on. Yes, all of those things, but evidence-based and never instead of, but as an adjunct to mainstream care. Yes.
Okay, last question. Up the back.
You mentioned integrated medicine. I wonder if you could let us know what sort of therapies might be involved in this particular aspect.
Okay, what sort of therapies are involved in integrated medicine? Integrated medicine is just a combination of both mainstream cancer care as given in my institution and in any major cancer center, plus my department, which offers symptom control techniques, which are non-pharmacologic, non-invasive, pleasant interventions that manage symptoms quite nicely, physical symptoms as well as emotional symptoms.
Well, thank you, Professor Cassileth. That was it.